Welcome to the Tepper School of Business Multimedia Series. For more information on the Tepper School at Carnegie Mellon, please visit us at www.tepper.cmu.edu/multimedia. And now, here's your selected video.
Well, and you've had such a prolific and successful career, starting in 1957 at what was then GSIA.
Right.
And everyone knows about your successful research and writing career, but we have a lot of alumni who have also had you in class. What is it that's motivated you in the classroom?
Well, I love to teach. I love to teach, and I'm a strong believer teaching is a way in which you get new ideas. You're teaching something, and all of a sudden, something flashes into your head, and you think that's interesting. I got to think about that. But I also like the interaction with the students. I mean, we're fortunate we have good students, and I also, of course, believe that I learned from Milton Friedman: don't limit your teaching to the people who happen to show up in your classroom. There's a big world out there.
Now, the book you've written, Why Capitalism, is very different than the book you wrote previously on the history of the Federal Reserve. And you are clearly viewed now as the foremost expert on the history of the Federal Reserve.
Thank you.
How was that process in writing that book? How long did it take you? What was involved in writing that?
The history of the Fed?
Yes.
Oh, that took a heck of a lot longer than I thought. I mean, I just was overwhelmed with the amount of material, and I had excellent full-time research assistants in Washington who really, without that support, it never would have been finished. So it took 15 years.
Wow. 15
years. I did other things during that period, sometimes quite actively, like running a congressional commission, which was a very time-consuming and absorbing and frustrating at times activity, but it was an interesting activity. But I was doing that at the same time that I was writing the history.
What a commitment that was.
Yeah.
Yes. The book, The History of the Federal Reserve, that covers the Federal Reserve from its founding through 1986. What can you tell us about that history that would be of interest to the general public?
We think of the Federal Reserve as being the agency that provides stable growth and low inflation. In fact, there have only been two periods in its history when it did that. One was from 1923 to about 1928 under the gold standard, and one was from about 1985 to 2002 when they followed something called the Taylor Rule. So one of the conclusions I come to is there's been an argument in economics from time immemorial as to whether you want to have a rule for monetary policy or you want to allow them to have discretion. Well, they don't do very well under discretion. I mean, most of their history is a period in which they produced the Great Depression, the Great Inflation, a large number of business cycles. They contributed to the current crisis. Their judgments are not very good. I mean, no one's judgments about the future can be very good. I mean, the future is uncertain. That's what we really do know about the future. Years ago, 1980, I came up with a proposal which said, you want to have a rule, and you want to announce what the rule tells you the Federal Reserve is going to do in the next 3 years. And they have to agree to commit themselves to that, and commit themselves to say that if we don't achieve what we said we were going to achieve, we will do two things. We'll explain to the administration, Congress, why we failed, and we'll offer our resignations. And they can accept our explanation, or they can accept our resignation. Now, many people would say, God, that's just terribly academic, but it isn't. I had the opportunity to discuss this for about a half a day with the Reserve Bank, people at the Reserve Bank of New Zealand, when they were thinking about changing their policy. And I, in the end, proposed that to them, and they improved on it. And that's where we got inflation targets. The inflation target They negotiate with the government of New Zealand, and they offer to resign if they don't hit it. And that has spread to many countries, and I hope it'll spread here. That's what we need. We need discipline in the system. We need a rule. We need to give people more confidence that what is going to happen in the future is going to be bright and, as best we can make it, stable growth and low inflation. We don't have anything like that now. We have much too much discretion, and too much hangs on the word of the chairman of the Fed. That's not a good way to run a capitalist democracy where one individual has so much influence on what's going to happen.
The Fed recently announced, although it wasn't covered in much detail, an inflation target.
Yes.
It seemed like nobody paid much attention to it.
Well,
was that intentional on their part?
I think they're trying to convince people that they're not going to inflate. And that will help them, of course, because interest rates will stay low. I don't think they have developed a mechanism by which they can achieve what they said, and that's very important.
As you look back at the history of the Federal Reserve and all the chairmen that have served, is there one that stands out in your mind as above all others?
Two. The first was a man named Benjamin Strong, who was there from the beginning until 1928, and he really made the old Federal Reserve, and it was a very different institution from the one we have now. And in the modern era, the outstanding governor, president, was Paul Volcker. Paul Volcker followed pretty closely what Margaret Thatcher always described in her book, The Downing Street Years. When she describes her years as prime minister, she says over and over again, I never negotiated my principles. I negotiated from my principles. That's important. She knew who she was determined, and she was consistent.